We're still in Hebrews. Going back to Hebrews chapter 11. We wrapped up chapter 10 about a month ago. Those of us who were here, Scott and Molly did an excellent job leading the series, a 3-week series on marriage. And now we're back to Hebrews chapter 11. There is, as there often is, the chapter divisions in the Bible don't emerge until the 12th century AD. But there's obviously a clear connection between the ending of chapter 10 and verse 39 and the beginning of chapter 11 with that word faith. Chapter 11 is a very well-known chapter. It's often referred to as a chapter of faith or the heroes of the faith, something along those lines. Because depending upon your translation, you can go down and just look at the opening of almost every verse, and those two little words often pop out: by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith Abraham, by faith whoever, by faith this individual, by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob, and this long litany of not just dealing with individuals who are tremendous individuals of faith, but dealing with faith itself. And that's really where I want to begin today. We're going to look at just verses 1 through 7 of chapter 11 of Hebrews. And it opens with the author's definition of faith. But I want to ask and begin, before looking at the chapter, I want you to answer the question, what is faith? Faith is that thing that we often talk about, we often read about, we hear lessons on it, we see examples of it in our own lives and the lives of individuals in the New Testament, the Old Testament. It's a very important part of Christianity, but it's often, as so many other things are within our Christian faith, it's one of those things that we just kind of gloss over, take for granted, don't really think much about it. And I think it's important from time to time to stop and ask a question, which seems to be a very simple question, but it's actually not necessarily always easy to answer. But if you were to answer the question, what is faith? And please don't quote Hebrews 11:1.
Belief that you depend on.
Belief that you depend on. Okay. What else is faith? It's probably not as easy as you may have thought. That's okay. And I've been doing this a long time, so I'm not afraid of quiet. I can deal with that. But what is faith? How would you define faith?
Belief without evidence that most people need.
Belief without evidence. It's not a matter of, well, here's the proof. Now do you believe? There's a gap there. What else? How else might you define faith or answer the question, what is faith?
I think it's something that you still believe in very strongly about, enough to be encouraged by it, but no one is there to tell you physically that it's present in your life, but you just know it. It's kind of a fluid, kind of not a solid physical fact.
Mm-hmm. Usually it is something that's important or significant. We rarely have faith in the things that really aren't that important. I mean, I'm sure we have faith in gravity, but I think we trust toward that scientific principle more than anything else. But we don't necessarily have faith in pencils or dry erase markers or anything along those lines. Faith is something that's usually important and significant in our lives. Something that's supposed to make a difference. Something that we're supposed to have an impact. What's the opposite of faith? And please don't say unfaith or unbelief. Don't just put on the front of something. What's the opposite of faith?
No trust.
Not having trust. Okay, that's good.
Believing evidence.
Which is not really believing.
Not accepting,
Accepting evidence.
agreeing with.
Yeah, giving assent to, I've seen the evidence, I've seen the proof, and now I have faith in it. We don't really have faith or belief in something that has been demonstrated to us. We cling to it as true. It gets into a different category. What else might be the opposite of faith?
I don't think it's always true, but sometimes experience.
Yeah, experience might have a positive impact upon our faith, but if we're waiting for that experience, then we're not really holding out on faith. I'll trust it once I've experienced it. That's not really faith. No. Another opposite of faith is hubris, this overwhelming self-confidence. I can do it. I don't need any help. I'm all on my own, and I trust in me, not in you, not in whatever, not in whomever or anything along those lines. I can do it myself.
Rugged individualism, I used to hear that word.
Yeah, rugged, like kind of that classic early 20th century Herbert Hoover rugged individualism. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't rely upon anybody else. Another classic American characteristic is no charity. We don't do charity here. And this is sort of a post-Great Depression thing where people had to receive the benefit of others and just to survive. And then there's this strong reaction of not relying upon others. We don't do that. You do it your own way. Well, the human condition demands that we rely upon one another. God made us to do that. We're supposed to. We're commanded to do that. But when we truly don't have faith, then we go our own way. We rely upon ourselves. We don't trust other individuals, and that includes we don't trust God. It's a matter of excessive self-confidence. It's not so much a matter of not believing. Matter of fact, not believing and not having faith sometimes can be a component that leads us toward faith. Remember, there was the gentleman who asked Jesus, I believe, help me in my unbelief. Well, wait a minute, does he believe or does he not believe? Yes. But if that person were to say, I don't believe in you, I don't trust you, I trust me, I believe in me, I can do it myself. It reminds me, I think I've told this story before, and I wasn't around for it. I was way too young, but when my brother, who's 3 years older than me, went to kindergarten for the first time, he was walking up the steps with my mother holding his hand, and just before they walked in, he pulled his hand out of hers, turned and said, I can go from here. And my mother always says, kind of sadly, I've never really had that much of an impact upon David's life after that. He just kind of went his own way. That's sort of an expression of a lack of faith or not having faith. We pull our hand out of God's hand and say, I can go from here. I don't need you. Which means we're also telling God, we don't trust you. One last question. Why is faith important? Whether we can define it or not, whether we have a full, clear understanding, be able to pin it down or know what the opposite of faith is, faith seems to be something that's important to Christianity. But why? Why is faith so important?
I think it's important because that's how you understand that Jesus is there. It's not just another event. And that faith gives you a strong feeling, the ability to have a strong feeling that you must have had his hand, and then later on you might not have it. But still got to believe he had his hand. I think faith is sort of a platform that draws you into understanding what he's doing for you.
It's an accessor. It opens the way for us. Why else might faith be important?
Peace and less worry.
Peace and less worry. Not that things won't happen that are difficult or bad.
But you're going to survive and make it through. So
We are not alone in those things. When we trust God and when we have faith in God, then there is a sense of peace. Not an absence of strife, but a sense of peace in the midst of strife, or just simply a sense of peace. Anything else? Why else might faith be important?
I think our little human minds aren't robust enough to understand the gospel, to know it, and so we have to have faith in it, because it doesn't make sense.
So much of Christianity, so much of what Christ taught is not very logical, according to our understanding, according to our own
For our
limitations.
little human minds.
Yeah. Although God made those little human minds,
Absolutely.
but there's a bridge that our little minds need to connect to the thing that He's trying to promote, advocate, the way that He's trying to communicate to us. The things that we've been dealing with just in the first 10 chapters of Hebrew are not necessarily that easy. And not because the Greek is difficult or anything along those lines, but when you start hearing some of the things that Jesus taught, which seem so simple, they're really not. An example I always use in my European church history classes when we start looking at the Trinitarian arguments of the 3rd and 4th and 5th century, and how these individuals want to explain the relationship between the Father and the Son, and the nature of the Son, and two persons, and fully human, fully divine. And they have all these nice, neat, logical progressions, relying upon the Greek language at that time, and pulling out all these doctrinal arguments. But at the end of the day, the one God, 3 persons just doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. It's completely illogical. What we're going to be addressing today in worship and what we're celebrating today, the resurrection, is completely irrational. It makes no sense. But the way that we can understand it as best we can is a matter of faith. So it is important to what we do and how we do it and why we do it and all of those good things. Faith is not just simply intellectual assent, and it's not just simply believing that something is true. I remember years ago, I was a kid at the time, and I guess it was a big deal. I'm not a big John Wayne fan. If you are, that's great. But I remember when he died, it was all over the news. And then like news reporters often do, they dig up all of these interviews. And I clearly, for some bizarre reason, remember him using the phrase, "I believe there's a supreme being." Well, the demons believe that. As a matter of fact, they probably knew it better than John Wayne, that there is a God. They had probably encountered that God more than John Wayne had. And that's not faith. Recognizing that it exists, even though that's a step in the right direction, but simply recognizing the existence of God is not necessarily recognizing who and what God is and how He is working in this world and what He can mean for us. Faith begins to bridge that gap, which we have to have. I think I was having a conversation with Joe a few years ago about how there's all these non-Christian New Testament scholars. They know all the Greek and they know all the history and they know all the stuff. And he was telling me it's interesting to hear them talk about how they can't figure out how in the world this backwater religion, offshoot of Judaism, within less than 500 years spread over the known Western world like wildfire. It just blows their minds that it could have spread all the way from some guy dying in Jerusalem all the way up into the regions of northwestern Europe and in all different social strata and cities and the countryside. It just spread rapidly, so dramatically and powerfully. Just don't have a clue how a historic phenomenon like that could take place. It's because it's more than just a historic phenomenon. Well, the author of Hebrews is going to help us in defining faith. So could somebody read verses 1 through 3 of chapter 11?
Now faith is assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by in the men of old gained approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen, what is not made out of things which are visible.
In that first half of verse 1, now faith is, in my translation is the same, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. Does somebody have something other than assurance of things hoped for?
Substance.
things hoped for.
Substance of things hoped for.
It's reality.
Reality.
Expected.
Expect.
Hope to hope for.
The idea behind this is this sense of now faith is the firm foundation. It's something you can grab onto and firmly rest upon. It's not a flighty sort of spiritual numinous type of principle that we really can't grasp. It's something that is truly solid and foundational and important and significant if we're going to move forward in the rest of this book and in understanding the previous 10 chapters. It is the firm foundation that we need to have. There's also this sense, in my translation, assurance of conviction. But it really means reality or substance, hypostasis. Is this idea of the real essence. Now, faith is the real essence of things hoped for, so that Christians are hoping and anticipating things now and especially in the future. And faith gives the ability to understand, to see, to grapple with, and to draw close to those things, making what is real become really real. It's that Greek word is often translated that way. What is real essence, or what is really real. Thus, things unseen or that have no substance without faith become real and substantial by faith, which does not mean they don't seem real. In other words, there are things out there that aren't really real, but we as Christians, and this is often the interpretation of faith for those outside of Christianity, that we're just sort of making it up. We believe that there's heaven and hell, and therefore, because we believe it, it's real for us. Therefore, our faith, our belief in something that isn't real becomes real, at least to us. That's not what the author of Hebrews is saying. He is not making this declaration that faith makes things that aren't real appear real to us. Faith doesn't create reality. It doesn't convince us something is real when it's not. In other words, it's not a matter of, well, the Bible is true to those who believe it. To those who don't believe it, it isn't real. No, it is real. And what faith does is it makes what's real, really real. Never could figure out how to do this part of the lesson without using the word real. So faith translates the otherwise unknowable into what is really real, or what is making the unknowable understandable as it really is, so that we can draw closer to understanding what it is that he's trying to communicate in regard to who and what Jesus is. This whole thing about entering into the heavenly sanctuary and all the things that we've talked about in the past become more real, more apparent. We have better understanding. Full understanding of this stuff? No, not now. And I don't even think then. I don't even think once Christ comes and takes us to be with him, I don't think there's still going to be a full and complete understanding. I don't think we're going to fully grasp it. But faith is necessary in order to understand these type of things that are typically unknowable and unattainable and unseen. They become attainable. They become visible. They become apparent. And it's not just I've noticed the commentaries that I use, they always talk about the spiritual. It makes those things that are spiritual more apparent and more real. It's also the things, because it's communicated throughout this entire chapter, it's also those things, not just that are spiritual, but those things that are future. Because the individuals that he talks about in chapter 11 are past individuals. Not just examples of faith, but they're also individuals whose faith becomes more than just an example for the believers at the time that the author of Hebrews is writing. But they also, their faith is not fully realized. It's a future realization. It's just like for us, we may have more understanding, better understanding, and we do have the words and the testimony and the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, but we haven't fully attained everything that he wants us to attain. We have not yet fully arrived. And so there are still future aspects to the Christian faith. So there's a future component to it as well. What we have now is not all that God has promised us. We don't have it all now. We get up in the morning, we come to church, we do Sunday school, go to service, we eat lunch afterwards, church in the evening, go to work Monday, go to work Tuesday, or school, whatever it may be. And we just kind of go through the motions. There's more to that type of existence now, but then there's also something better. That's one of the things the author of Hebrews is continually pushing for, that there is something better. So those things that are unseen, those things that are truly real by faith, we've kind of talked about a couple of those, but what might those things be? What are the things that he doesn't declare what it is, but what might he be talking about? The assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. What are those things that he might be talking about?
Future lives in heaven with God.
Our future life with God in heaven. We're given little glimpses of that periodically, but we don't really know. The details are not known to us. What else might be the unseen things? What might he be talking about?
Faith or his plan for us while we're here on earth.
Okay.
For our purpose.
Mm-hmm. There's a trust that we have to have in that. We have to have faith that God is going to make that real. It would be so nice if way back when I accepted Christ for the first time, God sat down with me and popped out this map and said, all right, here's your life. Point one, here's day one, here's the first week, here's the first next year, and then this is going to happen. Would have been great. It would have been so much easier. But it never really worked that way. Sometimes it feels like I'm stumbling through, but I'm not supposed to be stumbling through. I'm supposed to be clinging to Christ and following his lead. Don't always do that. What else might be those unseen things that we can see by faith?
Realities of what will be that you cannot comprehend at this time, but knowing that you're going to be moving into something much greater. Because it can be something like you have on earth, because the abilities you have here, I think laws that I might just translate there. I don't think you really know what is going to happen, sort of.
Okay. What else might be the unseen things? What about God? That might be the obvious answer, but raise your hand if you have actually seen God the way that we see each other or this world. I haven't. I've heard from God. I've experienced God in a relationship with him, but he's one of those unseen things. And as far as understanding him, that will take more than a lifetime. That will take eternity. And so it's faith that allows me to see and understand things about God, who he is and what he is. He's got me down. I don't have him down. I got to work on things on my end. Well, I can't do that just simply by perusing through Scripture and understanding it in an intellectual fashion or in some emotional fashion. It's not simply an emotional or an intellectual response. It's by faith that I understand God. The incarnation. This whole thing about God becoming a man while still being God. I don't have a full explanation for that. If you do, please let me hear it. But I have an understanding of it by faith. What we are dealing with today, what we're not in this lesson, but in our service, the resurrection. The way that we truly, truly come to understand that, know it to the point that we can, is by faith. That God, not just Jesus the man, but God, the Son of God, died and was raised from the dead. It was a bodily resurrection, by the way. Don't ever let that one escape you. The tomb was empty. And that is a key, intrinsic, ultimate component of my relationship with the Father. I don't have a full explanation of that, but I can come closer to understanding it and understanding it for it being really real as a result of faith. And then the list goes on, the relationship that we have with God, trusting in His leading, divine revelation. Faith sometimes opens our eyes and our minds and our hearts to things that are said in the Scriptures that we may have perused through that passage before, but then there's something that comes out. That's usually not some new type of way of approaching it that I figured out and nobody else has, but it's a way of attaining growth and development as a result of faith. And we trust in that. So in verse 2, the phrase gained approval, in my translation for it, by the men of old gained approval. And it really has the sense of established their record. The author of Hebrews uses this 7 times in the book of Hebrews, and it always means a witness of the biblical record. We have historic scriptural evidence of individuals, and parenthetically he's saying, and I'm going to tell you about some of them. Matter of fact, later on in the chapter 11, he's going to say, I'd like to tell you about all of these other individuals. He'll list out several other individuals and say, don't have time. We might have time to look at some of those individuals, but he is making this statement that it has this sense of divine commendation, that God has given divine approval of these lives that have been lived by faith. And look, we can point to them. We hear their words. We see their lives. A testimony that is expressly given of individuals that are trusting in God. We have record of it. So it's not something that we necessarily can just throw around as some sort of doctrinal or theological statement. There's a practical aspect to this. There is a living out of faith. Look, we've got examples. And then he starts giving examples in verses 4 and beyond of individuals that have actually done this. So their record shows a dynamic and active instances of trusting God and following His admonitions, affirming the characteristics and qualities of individuals of what it means to live by faith and trust in God. So it's never a matter of reading verse 1 and then wondering, well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is Abel and Noah and Enoch and Abraham, and then it goes on, and David, and it goes on and on and on, Moses and Joseph and Isaac and Jacob. We've got examples. We've got real concrete historic biblical examples of these type of individuals. And then in verse 3, the author again affirms that faith is a conviction of proof of things unseen, and it requires faith. We may not always think about this. It requires faith to believe and trust that the universe was made by God, was created out of nothing, and made by His Word and His Word alone. That's a tremendous concept that does require faith. To look out at this material world and think that an unseen God who is spiritual made it out of nothing, made it by the power of His own word requires faith, pure and simple. And he starts at this point because he's saying we can't look at those, what we might call heroes of the faith, those individuals that are whose faith examples are recorded in the Scripture until we get this point down first. That it all began with God, that creation occurred as a result of God, and that we can trust that He created it and made it all the way that He said that He did. Because in part what he's ultimately saying is we can trust God's testimony in how it was done, because guess what? Nobody was there when it happened. When Genesis 1:1 begins, only God is there. And therefore, how it took place, we only know that as a result of God communicating this to human beings who eventually will record it. So we must trust that testimony. And we also have to trust in the way that God did create the universe. And the word that he uses here, the Greek word, it means the universe of time and space, the real world that we know, the physical material world that we know and that we live in, that was simply created by God's word, out of nothing. In this day and age when the author of Hebrews is writing, and in the centuries before that, multiple deities would create the world out of existing material. And then The Old Testament comes along and we have this idea of one God always existing and then making existence out of non-existence, making a world out of something that doesn't exist. That takes a tremendous leap in this day and age, but it also takes a bit of a leap in in our day as well, because it requires a matter of faith to not ultimately have an understanding of the universe as simply being a result of scientific processes out of perpetually existing material. Carl Sagan once said, the universe is all that there ever was, all that there is, and all that there will ever be. The material world has simply always existed, and that always begs the question, but how? And before that, it's a theological question, and after that, it's supposed to be a scientific question. Well, that requires very little faith. It's always been here. And then we have all of these mathematical principles that tell us how it functioned. Although I thought about this later on, and it does require a certain leap of faith as well to believe in that also, but that's a different issue. I'll let Dr. Spivey deal with that in his apologetic series, not mine. And so there is this sense of divine revelation that this is how it was created and this is how the world works. A trust in not just in the way that the world was created, but in the testimony in which it was communicated to humanity. Could somebody read verses 4 through 7?
By faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous, God testifying about his gifts, and through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. For he obtained the witness that before his being taken up, he was pleasing to God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith.
Now, normally, if you were to ask somebody the question from the Old Testament, who is a person of faith? Well, you'd say Abraham, David, Moses, a lot of other names that would come to mind probably before Abel. But that's where he starts. He's moving chronologically. He's moving through the scriptures. And he's talking about because we don't know a tremendous amount about Abel. What we do know is really from Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 through 5, although it's a little bit after that, about the sacrifice that Abel gave in comparison to the sacrifice that his brother Cain gave. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Abel, on his part, also brought out of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering, but for Cain and for his offering he had no regard. So Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. In the Septuagint translation, the Greek translation of this, there's a hint that the reason why Cain's sacrifice was not acceptable was because he didn't follow the proper ritual form. The Hebrew, the Masoretic text, basically makes it much more clear than that. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that Cain didn't follow the correct form of sacrifice, of performing a sacrifice, but that Abel had, and this is a good Hebrew's way of looking at it, he had as the text says, a righteousness. There's an intertransformation that has taken place that is being expressed in his sacrifice. In other words, he's doing this willfully, wantingly. He desires to give the best of the best to God because of the relationship that he has with God. And the sacrifice that he performs is a natural outward expression of the inward transformation that has taken place in his life. And there are passages in the New Testament that seem to affirm that as well. In 1 John 3:12 it says, "Not as Cain, who was of the evil one and slew his brother. And for what reason did he slay him? Because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous." Well, we don't really see any righteous deeds other than the fact that probably Abel gave the best of what he had. And this is an expression of the fact that he has given an outward expression or an outward manifestation of that inward transformation that the author of Hebrews has mentioned in previous chapters as well. But he also notes that even in death, that Abel speaks to us. He speaks to posterity, and that although it's often viewed that he cries out for vindication, that vindication, the author of Hebrews will note, will be overshadowed in the next chapter. In chapter 12:24, it says, "And to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks better than the blood of Abel." In other words, there's been a better blood that's been shed. There's been a greater sacrifice that's been performed, that is, in Christ. But the author of Hebrews is using this as an example of faith. What does it mean to have faith in God, to have trust in God, to believe in God, to share in a relationship with God? It means you express that to God. He's not trying to appear better than Cain. He's not doing a compare and contrast. He's not looking over his shoulder and thinking, I can do better than Cain, and that will make God even happier. He's only thinking about God and how he can express the love that he has for God and the righteousness that he shares with him. And then in verse 5, Enoch. What do we know about Enoch?
He didn't die.
He didn't die.
He walked with God.
He walked with God. And there's not a whole lot more. It's a strange example that he gives. Now, we do know who his father was. Anybody know who Enoch's father was, by the way? It's Jared. I bet you know who his firstborn son was. It was Methuselah. He had other sons and daughters as well. He lived to be about 365 years. He walked with God, and God took him before he died. And this is an example of faith. And it may not be overwhelmingly clear, but the key phrase of this is the fact that he pleased God, or he was pleasing to God. And it points toward that close relationship again. It's a strange thing that we've got Enoch and Elijah in the Old Testament who do not die. They are both taken up to be with God. And I've heard lots of discussion and read a few things about why Enoch, why Elijah. It probably goes toward the closeness of their relationship in between Enoch and God, in the sense of God and Enoch were so close. And the phrase walked with God is not just used of Enoch. As a matter of fact, it's used of Noah, the next individual that we'll talk about. Noah walked with God as well. But it seems like Enoch walked a little closer with God. So much so that God would reward him without experiencing old age and death, but also because he wanted to be with God and God wanted him to be with him without the impediments of the physical world. Don't know this for sure. We're kind of reading into the text. But they walked together and Enoch pleased God. And we could spend days talking about what exactly that means. It probably talks about their closeness, about the righteousness that, and the worship and the love and the inward transformation that Enoch had. Whatever it is, however we may fill that gap, Enoch becomes this apt expression of what it means to walk by faith. So close with God, so pleasing to God, so much so that nobody else in the Old Testament other than Elijah has ever experienced this, and we don't know a whole lot more about Enoch beyond that. So it's a testimony of his faith, and although we don't have the details of what that means, it is probably pointing toward their closeness, that he is so overwhelmingly pleasing to God that God wants to draw him so closely to him that he took him to be with him. So that whatever it is about this world that God wants us to get past to be with him, that's what he wanted for Enoch. And then in verse 6, he doesn't talk about an individual. He sort of stops for a moment and camps out on this idea of pleasing to God, that it is the key to faith. Faith is the key to pleasing God. It conveys more than just recognizing God's existence, but it is trust in God. One of the things that came to mind this morning whenever I was going over the lesson, when I was very, very young, I can't remember being taught how to ice skate. I guess I started so young with my parents teaching me to ice skate. I've always known how to ice skate, so it must have been really, really young. Well, when we used to go ice skating at the Will Rogers Memorial Coliseum, my father, he had hockey blades, he was a great skater, he used to hold out his hands every once in a while and say, "Come on, let's go." And I would take his hands, and he would skate backwards. I still can't figure out how the man could skate backwards, and skate backwards so fast. And since he's in front of me, I can't see where we're going. But I know we're going fast, and I enjoyed it. But he was in control. He was in complete control of this little 3-4-year-old boy. We never crashed. I always trusted him completely. And that's what is being communicated here. God is reaching out his hands to Enoch and saying, "Come on, let's go." And God reaches out his hands to us and say, "Come on, come with me." And we take hold, and we can only see God, and he leads us along. And we trust where he's taking us. We don't, and I'm using this in sort of a non-biblical way, we don't hope God knows where he's going, and I hope this works out. We know God knows where he's going, and we know and trust completely, expressly, that if we hold on to his hands and he takes us along, it's going to be right where we need to be. Whatever it is that is pleasing to God in so many other ways, I think this is the first expression of what it means to be pleasing to God. That we take hold of his hands and say, "Wherever you take me, I'll go. Whatever you want to do with me, I'll do it. Whoever you want me to be, I'll be it. I trust you completely, and I'm not going to let go." Although, let's be honest, at least in my own life, I have let go sometimes. And that's when I would drift and crash into the boards at the hockey rink. But then God would still reach out his hands to me and take me along and continue to guide me in the way that I was going, because it's the way that he wanted to go. This is trust in a real person, not in a system, not in religion, not in doctrine. Doctrine's important, not in theology. Theology's important. This is ultimately trust in a person, in a real person, and the real way that he leads us. And then in verse 7, Noah. This next example. Noah trusted God in regard to the warning that he gave about the flood. And when God declared to Noah that the greatest cataclysmic event ever to occur in Earth's history was going to happen, Noah trusted him. He also affirmed his trust in God by preparing for that event with a certain, the idea of reverence is given. And he didn't just build the ark in a couple of days. This was a long, drawn-out process in which people laughed at him and ridiculed what he was doing. But he still trusted God in this long, drawn-out process of building this ark, knowing that what God said was going to happen, and trusting that what God planned for him to do was going to happen, and trusting ultimately that God was going to take care of him in this entire process. And Noah, once the flood came, sometimes I've heard this, that those that opposed him, he was vindicated against them. As if he gets on board the ark with his family and the animals, and the flood water starts to take place, God closes the door, and all these people are now screaming and crying and clamoring, and Noah is thumbing his nose at them saying, "I was right and you were wrong." The idea that comes across in Genesis 7:1 is that then the Lord said to Noah, "Enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time." Noah was a righteous man. Noah walked with God, and he trusted God completely and explicitly. These things and other examples that we'll see beginning with Abraham next week and beyond, it's not just faith in God for a moment, in an instant. These are long, drawn-out processes where it's day after day after day, after week, after month, after year of trusting in God, of having faith in God, and continuing to follow him by faith. When you read the life of Abraham, it won't take you very long to begin Genesis chapter 12, take it through chapter 50. That's not a long read. You can go home after lunch, read it in a couple of hours, maybe less time than that. But those are years, which probably felt like centuries to Abraham, who was probably constantly wondering, where are we going? What are we doing? What is the point behind all of this? Now, that doesn't come out in the text. not by any stretch of the imagination. But if we have felt that way, I'm sure other individuals have felt that way also. Noah also is the first person in the Old Testament and in Scripture in which the concepts of grace and righteousness are connected to them. Those ideas are conveyed, or sometimes those words are conveyed, so that Noah also, like Enoch, walked with God. In Genesis 6:9 it says, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. He was close to God as well. And we'll see other examples of that that are demonstrated throughout the Old Testament. Because remember, this is the scripture that the author of Hebrews has. He doesn't have the New Testament. But I wanted to ask one last question. For the author of Hebrews, these Old Testament elders and other individuals that we'll look at in chapter 11, they are the heroes of the faith for him. But stop and think for a moment, as believers, 2,000 years after the events of Christ's coming and his death, burial, and resurrection, and all 2,000 years of time, not just in the scriptures after that, but beyond just, although you may have someone in the Old Testament as well, but who for us are heroes of the faith? Who do we look to as examples of individuals that we would tack on after the little phrase, by faith, so-and-so? Who do you think of when you think of that faithful individual as an example for you?
My mother,
Why?
because she puts God first.
And I would imagine you've seen that.
Yes, constantly.
Mm-hmm. Who else? Who do you think of when you think of heroes of the faith? Person that often comes to my mind that I've mentioned before and that most, if not all of you knew, is that's Dr. Jack Gray, longtime professor of missions at Southwestern Seminary, Navy chaplain, missionary, pastor, tremendous man of prayer. He taught me to pray, not because he sat down and said, okay, this is what prayer is all about. He showed me Wednesday night after Wednesday night after Wednesday night, as we gathered in a time of prayer up in the prayer room that's now named after he and his wife. He demonstrated that. He lived it out. You could never approach Dr. Gray and tell him, I don't think prayer really works. He'd almost punch you. Not really. He was a kind, sweet, gentle man. But he trusted absolutely in God, and he expressed that in the life that he lived. Who do you think of? Who might you think of as a hero of the faith?
I'd say Paul.
The Apostle Paul. We know a lot about him because he was such a perfect example of a Christian. No, because he was a good example of a Christian and what it meant to be faithful. I don't think he always got it right. As a matter of fact, he and Peter were probably very hot-headed individuals, but they trusted in God. And it comes through in his writings. Who else might you think of? I thought someone online was going to speak. Anyone else? Well, we will see other examples of heroes of the faith. The author of Hebrews is not going to be finished. As a matter of fact, he's going to spend several verses just on Abraham alone. And that we'll look at beginning verse 7. Trying to remember, I've already written the lesson, but it's been a while. It's been a couple of weeks. The next several verses will deal with Abraham. But then if you look down through this chapter, you see other names: by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob, by faith Joseph, by faith Moses, and Moses, and a few more verses, and then flip over and there are several other issues. And we can start tacking on other individuals from the New Testament with Paul and with Peter and John and the other apostles. Individuals who were not perfect, who were not saintly the way that the world thinks of saintly, but were saintly because they walked with God, because they were close to God. Not perfect, sometimes making mistakes, but setting forth an example for us of what it means to walk with God and to trust in Him. Because that's ultimately the key, I think, that the author of Hebrews is getting at. He wants his congregation to trust in God. Because God is always reaching His hand out to us. He's always reaching His hand out to this congregation. And in the light of what we've looked at in Hebrews so far, that idea of drifting back, the author of Hebrews is so concerned about this congregation not drifting back. I think what he's communicating to them is that God doesn't want them to drift back because He's reaching out ahead of them to follow Him, to bring them along. God doesn't drag us kicking and screaming, but He does move us forward, always moving us forward, even though we might look back to see other examples of faith and of faithful individuals, which I believe He wants us to do. But I think what He's trying to communicate to this congregation is that we need to trust in God. Trust, and I know this is a phrase we hear all the time. You've probably heard lots of sermons on it, lots of Sunday school lessons on it. But it's something that we need to be reminded of. It's the key to our relationship. It's not trusting in a system. It's not trusting in baptism. It's not trusting in the way that we do things here at Gambrell Street. It's not trusting in some sort of program or ministry. It's trusting in a person completely and explicitly, knowing that we can trust in Him and believe in Him no matter what, no matter the difficult times that we have ahead. Let me go ahead and close this with prayer. Father, we're grateful and thankful for this time that we have to look at your word and to see just a few examples of many others, of individuals who lived by faith, who trusted in you, who didn't just believe that you existed, but trusted in you to lead them, to guide and direct them. Individuals that walked with you and that clung to you no matter what, in the most difficult of times, in the most trying of times, in the most uncertain of times. You were that certainty that continually guided them. Help us to remember that. Help us to cling to you, to continue to hold on to your hands as you lead us forward in what you want us to be as individuals, as the body of Christ, as members here at Gambrell Street, to fully entrust our lives to you, remembering that we need to do that every day. We didn't just do that once in the past whenever we came forward and accepted Christ publicly, but we have to do that every day, to take up our cross daily and to follow after Christ. Help us to do so. For it's in His name that I pray. Amen.